Super excited to have you here, Baptiste, and would love to hear a lot more about the regulatory landscape and how it's kind of evolving in Europe. If you could start with a quick intro to yourself, your kind of background and what you've done, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Namrata, for inviting me here. And I'm very happy to get the opportunity to explain a bit about this extremely fastly evolving landscape regarding EU legislation that will be affecting particularly the textile sector and many others. So I'm Baptiste Carrière-Pradal. I'm the co-founder with Bente Bauer of 2B Policy, a sustainability policy advisory firm, which is supporting organizations, brands, and other players so that they can understand the upcoming legislation, anticipate those so that they can adjust their operations, strategies, and other elements in view to already anticipate compliance today, and understanding the change that will happen in the way they produce, in the way they market their product, and in the way they design their product.
So maybe I start with CSRD and maybe just an understanding of what the law is, how it applies to companies, and how companies should start thinking about that legislation and kind of maybe a little bit of the background around it.
The CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, has been in the making for some time. It's a follow-up to some ways of the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. The idea behind this legislation is to empower the investor community into making better decisions, into be able to identify which are the organizations which are the most sustainable in some ways and which have the most sustainability practices. To this end, it will be requiring to disclose different types of policies and performance on fields that may be linked to how you operate in your value chain in relation to environmental and social management of your value chain partners, how you calculate your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions and what are those, and to disclose those, as well as your plan to be able to curb your carbon emission. So it's really a wide, broad spectrum of disclosure that one will have to do in order to be able to inform regarding your entire practices. It's already voted regulation. So in the same that it's passed, now what we are waiting for is the exact content of what will need to be disclosed. We have the FPAG, which has already created a draft, which is being reviewed right now. And today we are in May 23. We expect that by June 23, the final list of all of the requirements that one company will have to abide by in order to disclose all of their performance linked to environmental and social will be completely finalized. In terms of timing, for mainly of the big corporation, what we do expect to see is that by 25, organization will have to report based on the 2024 exercise. This is exactly tomorrow. That means that if I just come back on the scope 3 emission, that you need to have already implemented systems in order to be able to evaluate what are your emission in your scope 3. Just to come back on it, when we talk about scope 3 emission, we talk about not only the emission linked to your own operation, but also the emission happening in your own value chain linked to the creation of the products that you are putting on the market. So it requires to have a proper infrastructure in order to be able to gather the data, to be able to evaluate such, and to be able to compile it in such a way to be able to inform about your scope 3 emission. This financial reporting directive is also of importance and material, not only for companies which are based in Europe, but for any company which are operating on the EU soil. The thresholds are based on different elements. That means that also it was estimated lately by the Wall Street Journal that tens of thousands of US companies were also to report on the CSRD requirement. So it's really a requirement that will have impact all through and that will push transparency towards the financial community of all of the environmental and social performance of brand traders which are operating in Europe.
Thanks, Baptiste. And I think what's interesting about the CSRD is also the kind of element of reduction. Quantifying is one piece, and I think then reducing means that the quantification needs to be done at a level of granularity that you can start to also track kind of the reductions in what you're doing.
In this case, we do see a trend which is indeed, to your point, not only asking people to report on what is happening today, but also to report on how they plan to curb it. And the upcoming legislations will report and that will require you to put all of the means possible in order to effectively curb the emissions and to improve on many other impacts that you have outlined. So it's really a coordinated flow of regulation that we see happening that indeed push you to know, reduce, and show that you are implementing everything to effectively reduce and improve your overall footprint. If you want to have a solid and robust plan to be able to reduce your emission, that requires you indeed to have a lot of elements linked to your value chain. You will need to have a lot of primary data linked to your exact value chain, because you want to be in capacity to know exactly where the impact comes from, what stage of your process produced the highest impact, and therefore to identify the best solution to tackle the impact in your hotspot, in your value chain.
Moving from kind of corporate reporting to the consumer side, I think it would be super interesting to understand a little bit more on the directive for empowering consumers for the green transition. What does that mean? What does that mean for businesses?
The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive aims at informing in a proper way the investment community. Another actor which has been identified by the European Commission as being critical to properly drive a better future, a more circular future, are the consumers. And to this end, the Commission concluded that, rightfully so, in order to empower properly the consumer to select better product or services, they need to be properly informed. And the first step into being properly informed is to regulate the voluntary claims which are made by the private actors when they want to differentiate a product or service as being better for the environment. More than half of the claims which are on the market are not properly based on actual scientific evidence or other facts, and are more marketing than science, that therefore they decided to put regulation in order to force the private sector to abide by more stringent rules where they want to communicate about the environmental performance of their products. To this end, there is two legislation which are important. The first one is the consumer empowerment. The consumer empowerment legislation requires organizations to substantiate their claim, to have them verified, and to rely on label, in short. Another piece of legislation that will tell you how you have to substantiate the claim, and it's called the Green Claim Directive. Those two pieces of legislation, consumer empowerment and substantiating green claim, have to be seen as going hand in hand. They are kind of a twin legislation. They cannot leave one without the other. The consumer empowerment needs, you need to substantiate, and substantiating claim tell you how you have to substantiate. If you look at the substantiating green claim directive, you'll be able to identify the main requirements that are put forward in order to invite organization, in this case to mandate organization, to properly substantiate. In order to make a claim at a product level, first your claim needs to be holistic. If we talk about the textile sector, for instance, you need to have, if you make a claim at a product level, you need to have evaluated the claim on a range of impact, these 16 impacts, which are the impacts which are known as the one of the PEF. So it's all about carbon footprint, water footprint, land use, eutrophication. And you need to have also evaluated microplastic. Then after, the regulation tells you that your claim needs to be material. Two ways to measure if a claim is material. The first one is the EU eco-label. For all of the products which have EU eco-label, you have a list of topics that have been checked as part of the EU eco-label to evaluate the sustainability of a product. So this is one avenue. Another avenue which is mentioned is, again, using PEF methodology. The PEF is a Product Environmental Footprint. It's a program which was launched by the European Commission, its environmental branch, the Directorate General for Environment, which ambitioned to have a common method for different sectors to be able to evaluate the footprint of a product. At the time, the idea was that in order to ensure a common market for green product, we need to be able to evaluate the footprint of a given product in the same way everywhere. The PEF methodology allows you to evaluate all of the impact, coming back to my 16 main impacts, and then to addition them into one single score. This is something not in this case to be meant to be communicated to the consumer as per this law, but just to use in the background to identify if I want to make a claim linked to betterment of water consumption in one step, how does that rank compared to all of the other issues of greenhouse gases, land use, etc., etc.? So there is ways to do so by putting all of those, by normalizing all of the impact, and then ultimately you have a contribution to an overall score, and that allows you to identify which are the most material. Coming back to it, therefore, that means that you need, once you have ensured that it's holistic, you have to ensure that it's material. For that, you need to have indeed used either the eco-label or an LCA methodology such as a PEF to be able to make your claim. So that means that you need to have a complete view in order to ensure or to be able to demonstrate that there is no trade-offs. Because you want to say that if you want to claim that your product has a reduction of its water footprint by 50%, 60%, or 70%, then you need to be able to demonstrate that this is not done detrimental to its carbon emission or land use or any other element. Then after, it will tell you in plus of the holistic and the material, it will require that it's verified. So that you have a third party which is ensuring that what you are claiming is robust and solid. If you want to make a label to distinguish a product from its competition, you need to be also to demonstrate that this product has a significantly better performance than the average of the market. It also requires to have a clear visibility on the performance need of the market.
Last but definitely not least, can you tell us what's going on in France when it comes to the Asia Law, the climate law? We know there's a lot of movement in France in particular, so it would be super useful to understand that ecosystem and what's happening there.
In 2009 already, there were conversations in France regarding mandatory labeling of products to disclose to the consumer the environmental performance of the product. And at the time, the Commission kind of said, wait. Let's not have every country deciding about their own label. Let's agree to have this conversation at European level. But then the French said, happy to, but at the same time, it may take too long. So let's still move forward with a French labeling scheme. And this is what they do with the Loi Climat, the climate law, which was voted in 2021. So starting with the apparel sector, every piece of garment that will be put on the French market no later than 2026, will have to bear an information linked to its environmental performance. So therefore, what the French government did is to assemble representatives of the industry, civil society, and others, ask them to each propose a method, something that happened in 2021 and 2022, and then to test the method. And the final conclusion was made in November 2022. Then what we have in beginning of this year is that a special branch of the French Ministry of Environment, therefore, took all of those methods and now kind of takes the best of each and every method to be able to communicate, hopefully before the summer, a first draft method that will be used to be able to calculate the footprint of all of the product. And then by the end of 2023, to have communicated the final package where the government will tell you which database you have to use, which method you have to use, and which label you have to implement on the product.
What's happening in the circularity space, if there's regulation coming through there or something the businesses need to start looking at?
Definitely. Taking a step back, many of the legislation which are targeting today, for instance, if I were to take the textile and footwear sector, but also other consumer goods, in the case of the textile sector, come from the Circular Economy Action Plan. Where the Commission wants to enhance and to ensure that there are more circular product placed on the market, more sustainable product placed on the market. To this end, for instance, the Commission has proposed a new regulation, which is the ESPR, Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, that aims at, quoting the European Commission, making sustainable product the norm moving forward. The Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation is a full list of regulatory options that can be after use for individual sector to select the most appropriate options for each and every sector in order to ensure more circular product. By options, what do we mean? The Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation talks about implementing durability requirement on product, reparability requirement on products, recyclability requirement on products, recycled content use on product. So information to consumer talks about the implementation of the digital product passport, which is to be understood as a digital twin that would bear all of the information linked to a product and to live as long as a product lives. So to follow this product through its entire life up to its disassembly or recycling at the end of its process. So this piece is a very powerful tool that the European Commission will have once it's voted to be able to implement sector by sector requirement. The textile sector has been identified as the first sector to try this eco-design for sustainable product regulation. But after its aim, it should be unfolded to many other sectors, always having in mind to increase circularity of the product, leveraging, as I mentioned, a few levies and few particularities of each and every product. But it will have a direct impact about how people design the product. So if we take a step back again at all of the different legislation that we have talked about, we see that virtually what will be regulated in the future is how you source your product, how you design your product, how you communicate about your product, how do you communicate about your brand performance to your consumer, How do you communicate about your brand performance to your shareholders? So it's really like all of the life stages of a organization which are being impacted by all of those regulations targeting circular economy and the reduction of impact of the industry. So it's definitely, it will have a material impact. So now let's make sure that this impact is properly pushing everybody in the good direction.
Thank you so much, Baptiste. And just to your point around reduction and calculation being the first step, we're completely on board with that. We think good calculations obviously then allow you to understand reductions and focus on reducing, but you have to start with the first step, which is how do you get to calculating more robustly. Thank you so much for spending time with us and helping navigate this very complex and very fast evolving space.
You're very welcome, Nam. Have a good day.
Thanks, Baptiste.